Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Hare Krishna Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Krishna Krishna, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama. Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Jaya Jaya Guru Dev, Guru Dev, Guru Dev. Jaya Jaya Guru Dev, Jaya Prabhupada, 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 Prabhupada. Jaya 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 Kodanitai Maya Poshashi, Kodanitai Maya Poshashi, Kodanitai Maya Poshashi, Kodanitai Jaya Maya Poshashi. Iskam Guru Vrinda ki jai, Shri Prabhupada ki jai, Shishi Kodanitai Maya Poshashi ki jai. Nitai Gaura Premanandi Shimati Shiva. So reading from Srila Prabhupada Lilamrita. It's still chant Hare Krishna and fight. Long chapter. The next morning, from the port, Srila Prabhupada was watching the devotees swimming in the Bay of Bengal. Calling Harisarya, he said he would like to bathe in the ocean and asked him what he thought about it. Harisarya and the other devotees present all thought it was a good idea. Seawater was supposed to be very good for health, they said. Prabhupada said he would try it, and after taking his morning massage, walked down to the seashore, wearing his gamsha and carrying a towel. The ocean shore was about 100 yards from the hotel, and by the time Srila Prabhupada reached the water, all the devotees were running after him in their gamshas. Some of the devotees were already in the ocean, and when Prabhupada reached the water's edge, they all gathered around him. As the waves glided in and swelled around Prabhupada's feet, Harisari scooped palmfuls of water and began to bathe Prabhupada's body, his arms, chest and head, washing away the mustard oil he had applied during the massage. Soon other devotees began reverently splashing handfuls of water onto Prabhupada's body. Standing almost up to his knees in water, the bright sunshine illuminating his golden-hued body, Prabhupada laughed as the devotees joined in. The devotees realized that this pastime was just like an abhishek, or bathing the deity, and when Guru Kripa Swami began to sing prayers for bathing the deity, Chintamani Prakaras Satmashu, the other devotees joined in, singing and taking part in the abhishek by the sea. Srila Prabhupada enjoyed it, sometimes putting his head forward to indicate that he wanted water poured on his head, then closing his eyes as the devotees poured the water. When Prabhupada lost his balance for a moment, Harisari grabbed him. Prabhupada's feet had been sinking into the sand, and when he held one foot out, it was muddy. As he wriggled his toes, the devotee poured water on the foot, washing it clean. Prabhupada then bent over, put ocean water in his mouth and spat it out. Only Guru Kripa Swami was quick enough to catch some of the water and drink it. As Prabhupada allowed the devotees to participate in bathing and gently massaging him, the devotees were carried away by ecstatic feelings. After about 10 minutes, Prabhupada came out of the water, changed his clothes, and walked back to the hotel, where 2 devotees escorted him to a comfortable chair, sat him down and carried him up to his room for his afternoon rest. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So we're reading from the 5th canto, this chapter. It's chapter 13, and it's Rahugana, converses with Jad Bharat, and its text 8. Chalan Kvachit Kantaka Sakarangre Chalan Kvachat Kataka Shakarangir Nagaruksho Vimana Ivaste Nagaruksho Vimana Ivaste Pade Pade Vyantara Vaninatita Pade Pade Vyantara Vaninatita Kautumbika Krujate Vai Janaya Kautumbika Krujate Vai Janaya Chalan Kvachit Kantaka Sakaran Gir Nagaruksho Vimana Ivashate Pade Pade Vyantara Vaninadita Kautumbika Krujati Vaijanaya Chalan Kvachit Kantaka Sakarangir Nagaruksho Vimana Ivaste Pade Pade Payantara Vani Nadita Kautumbika Krujati Vaijanaya Chalan Kvachit Kantaka Sarakarangir Nagaruksho Vimana Ivaste Pade pade bhayantara vinadita. Kotambika krujati vaijanaya.
Shalam Kuchit Kantaka Shakarangrir
Kalan kvachit kantaka sarakangarir.
Nagarukshu Vimana Ivaste Adepate Pyantara Vaninardita Otumbika Krudite Vaijanaya
Kotambika krujati vaijanaya.
Shalam Pachit Kantaka Shakaranangir
Shalam Kuchit Kantaka Shakarangrir
Nagaruksho Vimana Bhaktivaste
Ruksho namaste.
Adepade Gantara Vaninadata
Pade pade bhyantara vaninadita.
Kautumbika Krujati Vaijanaya
Kotambika krujati vaijanaya. Ladies.
Shalam Kachit Kantaka Sarkarangri
Shalam Kuchit
Kantaka sakarangir.
Nagarukshu Vimanani Vaste
Nagaruksho
Namaste
Pade Pade Pyantara Praminardita
Pade pade bhyantara vaninadita.
Kautumbika Krujati Vajanaya
Kotambika krujati vaijanaya.
Shalam Kachit Kanta Sakaram Rangir
Shalam kvachit kantaka sakarangir.
Nagurukshur Vimanas Ivaste
Nagaruksho
Namaste
Pade Pade Vyantara Vaninardita
Adepate Pyantara Vaninardita
Kautumbika Krutyati Vaijanaya
Kotambika Chalan, wandering. Kachit, sometimes. Kantaka sakara,
Kantaka Shakara
pierced by thorns and small stones.
Yes, by thorns and small stones
Angry,
Angry
whose feet.
His feet
Naga, the hills.
hills
Arukshu, one desiring to climb.
One desire to climb
Vimana,
Vimana
disappointed.
Disappointed
Eva, like.
Like
Ashte, becomes.
Becomes
Pade, pade,
Pade
step by step.
Step by step
Abhyantara,
Abhyantara
within the abdomen.
in the abdomen
Vanina,
Vanina
by the strong fire of appetite.
by the strong fire of appetite
Adita,
Ardita
being fatigued and aggrieved.
being fatigued and aggrieved
Kotumbika,
Kutumbika
a person living with his family members.
person with his family members
Krujati, becomes angry.
becomes angry
Vai, certainly.
certainly
Janaya,
Janaya
at the family members.
the family members
Translation. Sometimes the merchant in the forest wants to climb the hills and mountains, but due to insufficient footwear, his feet are pricked by small stone fragments and by thorns on the mountain. Being pricked by them, he becomes very aggrieved. Sometimes a person who is very attached to his family becomes overwhelmed with hunger, and due to his miserable condition, he becomes furious with his family members. Responsively, please. Sometimes the merchant
sometimes the merchant
in the forest
in the forest
wants to climb the hills
wants to climb the hills
and mountains, but due to insufficient footwear,
but due to insufficient footwear
his feet are pricked
his feet are pricked
by small stone fragments
by small stone fragments
and by thorns on the mountain.
and by thorns on the mountain.
Being pricked by them,
Being pricked by them
he becomes very aggrieved.
becomes very aggrieved.
Sometimes a person
Sometimes a
who is very attached to his family,
who is very attached to his family,
becomes overwhelmed with hunger.
becomes overwhelmed with hunger,
But due to his miserable condition,
due to his miserable condition,
he becomes furious
becomes furious
with his family
with
members.
his family members.
Papa Srila Prabhupada ki jai. The ambitious conditioned soul wants to be very happy in this material world with his family. But he is compared to a traveller in the forest who desires to climb a hill full of thorns and small stones. As stated in the previous verse, the happiness derived from society, friendship and love is like a drop of water in the scorching heat of the desert. One may want to become very great and powerful in society, but this is like attempting to climb a hill full of thorns. Srila Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur compares one's family to high mountains. Becoming happy in their association is like a hungry man's endeavouring to climb a mountain full of thorns. Almost 99.9% of the population is unhappy in family life, despite all the attempts being made to satisfy the family members. In the Western countries, due to the dissatisfaction of the family members, there is actually no family life. There are many cases of divorce, and out of dissatisfaction, the children leave the protection of their parents. Especially in this age of Kali, family life is being reduced. Everyone is becoming self-centered because that is the law of nature. Even if one has sufficient money to maintain a family, the situation is such that no one is happy in family life. Consequently, according to the Vanishram institution, one has to retire from family life in middle age. Panchas sodvam vanam brajay. One should voluntarily retire from family life at the age of 50 and go to Vrindavan or a forest. This is recommended by Srila Prahlad Maharaj in the Bhagavatam 7.5.5. Tat sadhu manye suravarya dehinam sada samudvigna diyam asadgrahat hitvatma patam griham andakupam vanam gato yad daram ashrayata. There is no benefit in transferring from one forest to another. One must go to the Vrindavan forest and take shelter of Govinda. That will make one happy. The International Society for Krishna Consciousness is therefore constructing a Krishna Balaram temple to invite its members as well as outsiders to come and live peacefully in a spiritual atmosphere. That will help one become elevated to the transcendental world and return home back to Godhead. Another sentence in this verse is very significant. Kutumbika krujati vai janaya. When one's mind is disturbed in so many ways, he satisfies himself by becoming angry with his poor wife and children. The wife and children are naturally dependent on the father, but the father, being unable to maintain the family properly, becomes mentally distressed and therefore chastises the family members unnecessarily. As stated in the Srimad Bhagavatam 12.2.9, Achinandara dravina yajyanti giri kanam. Being disgusted with family life, one separates from the family by divorce or some other means. If one has to separate, why not separate willingly? Systematic separation is better than forced separation. Forced separation cannot make anyone happy, but by mutual consent or by the Vedic arrangement, one must separate from his family members at a certain age and fully depend on Krishna. This makes one's life successful. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Gyananjana Shalakaya Chakshuran Militam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manovistam Stavitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupagada Mayam Dadati Swavadanti Tam Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhunichananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhattarinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So I'll just read the translation again. Sometimes the merchant in the forest wants to climb the hills and mountains, but due to insufficient footwear, his feet are pricked by small stone fragments and by thorns on the mountain. Being pricked by them, he becomes very aggrieved. Sometimes a person who is very attached to his family becomes overwhelmed with hunger, and due to his miserable condition, he becomes furious with his family members. So this is part of the same series of points that Jad Bharat is making to Maharaj Rahugan about the reality of trying to find happiness in the material world. He's referring it to as being like a drop of water in a desert. And then he's going on now to say that the family becomes a source of... but it's interesting actually because it refers to him being very attached to his family. And you think if somebody was very attached, then they wouldn't be furious with their family members. So it's interesting, isn't it, that due to attachment is what causes the anger. And the very thing, normally you would think if someone's very attached to their family, that they would be doing everything to try and please them, but that attachment infuriates them. And then Prabhupada refers to the poor wife and and children. Then they get the blame. When one's mind is disturbed in so many ways, he satisfies himself by becoming angry with his poor wife, and children. The wife and children are naturally dependent on the father, but the father, being unable to maintain the family properly, becomes mentally distressed. And then Prabhupada gives an interesting statistic. He says 99.9% of the population is unhappy in family life. So the 0.1% that are happy in family life are only happy because they're not aware of the reality, which is that family life is a cause of distress in general, unless one is engaged in a Krishna conscious family life. So the general system in the Vedic system, the Varnashram system, is that the family life is there for 25 years, and then at the age of 50, and Prabhupada refers to that as well, by mutual agreement, they decide to separate, or sometimes the wife will stay with the husband and they will travel, go to the holy places, and then eventually the final stage, then there's complete separation. So it's accepted in the Vedic culture that family life is only a 1/4 stage of the life of a living being, and it's not something that you nestle down into and live happily ever after until your dying day. So it's accepted that it isn't a permanent arrangement, and it certainly isn't going to be a source of lasting happiness and satisfaction, unless the centre, as Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur in his song is singing, if everyone in the family are devotees of Krishna, then I am not the owner of the house or the family, I am their servant, and my job is just to serve everybody and feed them and clothe them and make sure everyone's happy and healthy so that they can serve Krishna. So this is ideal household life. So quite a bleak picture, but only bleak if we don't have the option, the alternatives, if the all in all is, and it's a shame because people don't really have an alternative, so it's referred to as a man jumping in a dried up river. He jumps into the river for relief, and the river's dried up, so he simply breaks his bones. And then when he breaks his bones, of course, he decides, well, I don't think the river's a good idea, so then he divorces. But he doesn't have an option in general society now. A person will try to take shelter of the river of married life and then break a few things and realize this is not for him. But then there's no alternative other than to just try and find another situation with somebody else. And so you get the businessman who reaches 50 and realizes he's not interested in his wife anymore, and the secretary is 25, so he runs off with the secretary and tries to do the same thing again, and then by the time he's 75 he comes to the same realization. So Vedic culture is there to give people the information to avoid falling into the different pitfalls and illusions that ensnare the living entity generally. And Prabhupada is saying also that the International Society for Krishna Consciousness is constructing the Krishna Balaram temple so that people can live peacefully. Of course, the Krishna Balaram temple and inviting people to Vrindavan, that's going on all over the world now by Prabhupada's mercy. There are so many temples with Radha Krishna and Gauranitai, and so we can experience the sanctity of the atmosphere, and the Dal, which is the holy place, becomes manifest wherever Krishna is being worshipped. The only difference between Vrindavan and living in a temple is that the Vrindavan atmosphere is only there as long as the worship is going on nicely to the deities, and as that reduces, then the atmosphere recedes. Whereas in the place where Krishna appears and performs his pastimes, that place always remains sacred and the atmosphere is always sanctified, whether or not the worship is going on or not in the temples that are there. So Prabhupada is saying the spiritual atmosphere will help one become elevated to the transcendental world, and then he can return home back to Godhead. So that's the real home that we're looking for. Trying to find a home in the material world is a futile attempt. Any questions or comments? Yes, Robbie.
Interested if there's any, it's like, obviously because of the context and stuff, from the man's perspective only, and I'm interested in if there's any wisdom on family life or whatever from the woman.
From the woman's perspective?
Yeah. What do you think about that?
Yeah, that's a nice question. So, we have a philosophy now which is that everyone should be considered equal. So the Vedic culture understands that a man has certain characteristics and responsibilities. Now it's not necessarily that because he's in a male body he's behaving how a man should be, or a female is behaving how she should be. And there's lists of qualities of what a woman is aspiring for, and then also what a man is aspiring for. So we see here the whole thing is breaking down because the man is not behaving as a man should be, so therefore he's becoming furious with his family members, and then he blames his poor wife and children who are dependent upon him. So the man means he has to take a strong position and provide shelter and responsibility and not blame his dependents, but understand that that's his duty. And then for the wife also, she can only be expected to play the part of being the ideal wife in relation to an ideal husband. So if he's abusing the facility, then it's very difficult for her to also follow what she should be doing. So because there is so little information, and because, see, they're trying to make it a classless society. Varnashram means there's Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya and Brahmin. They're the four different types of people. Brahmin is like the thinker, the priestly caste. Kshatriya is the warrior, the manager, the protector of the society, the one who protects the citizens. Vaishya is the mercantile, so they wheel and deal and they generate income. And then Shudra are the labourer class. So they say, no, everyone should just be equal. We should all just be the same. But then if you make everyone the same, say you decide, okay, we take all the wealth and we give everybody now, I don't know how much it would be, £10 million, everyone's got £10 million. And if you come back in a year, most of them will have wasted the money, not invested it. Some will have invested it nicely. So different people will behave in certain ways according to their natures, you see. So the nature has to be identified, and then we can act accordingly. And it's interesting the way the political system works for the Shudra. Communism works because everybody gets equal for the worker. So they all get the same amount, they all live in the same size house, they all get the same facility. And for the Vaishya, then capitalism works, where he goes out and he makes money and he's industrious. And then for the Kshatriya, the warrior, monarchy works. He's the king of his kingdom, he looks after everybody. he rounds up the rogues and thieves and chastises them. And then for the Brahminical class, anarchy works because they live outside of society, they're not taxed, they're there to give advice, and they live in a very simple, poverty-stricken condition generally, so that they can't be seduced or tempted by material opulence, and then they can give unbiased advice to the kings who can protect everybody. So if you try to make it a classless society, those natures will still manifest, and certain people will be inclined to certain ways. And the ideal society is where you incorporate all four systems at the same time to keep everybody happy. You recognize what people are different, and therefore at an early age the child is identified as what he is according to his qualities, and then how he should be trained. So in the Vedic culture, the woman is protected, and her vulnerability is recognized rather than pretended that it's not there. So when people are being encouraged to pretend that they're not vulnerable, then it just makes them more vulnerable. And unfortunately that's what's happening. The women are being exploited because they're being told, no, you're equal to a man, so you can do this, and you can stay out late at night, and you can wear practically nothing, and you can frequent these places and everything's fine, because men do it, so therefore you should be able to do it as well. So they should actually be protected and respected actually. The woman is, in Vedic culture, when a woman bears a child as a mother, then she's considered worshipful, respectful, and she should be given special facility and privileges. And that's not looking down on them, that's looking up to them actually, respecting them for what they are. And Janaka Pandit, he says, symptoms of a person who actually has knowledge is that he sees other person's property as garbage in the street, and he sees every woman, apart from his wife, as mother. So that's how a woman should be respected. She shouldn't be seen as an object of gratification. If she's not a mother just now, then in due course she will be someone's mother. She's also someone's daughter, so she should be seen like that. Mother, potential mother, someone's daughter, and then we can respect them. Any other questions or comments?
I think, like in arranged marriages and stuff, like in India, is it often that the bride is like a lot younger than the man? And how does that sort of fit with the Vedic understanding? If you're not the same age, and you're supposed to end family life at 50 or 75 or something, how does that work?
Yeah, that's the general standard. Sometimes the girl won't leave home, she'll still stay with the family, but she'll be married at a very young age. And they have a saying that in the West, the woman marries the man she loves, and in the East, the woman loves the man she marries. Because love is something you can learn to love somebody. We have a very cheap version of what love is these days. Love is something which gratifies my senses, which pleases my sentiments, and when I don't love her anymore, like that song, bring back that loving feeling. So when the loving feeling goes, the loving feeling's gone, okay, so let's ditch this relationship. But there's a story of a Jewish man who wanted to get rid of his wife, and he went to the rabbi and he said, I'd like my wife to vamush, please. And the rabbi says, okay, well it's very simple now. You just make a vow and you break it. And if you do that, then your wife will die in 2 weeks. And he goes, okay, what vow shall I make? And he goes, well, we need a new mikveh, which is a bathing place. He says, why don't you vow to build the mikveh and then just don't build it? He goes, okay, I vow to build the mikveh. He goes, okay, she'll be dead in 2 weeks. He goes, fantastic. He's walking out, he says, just before you go, he goes, yeah. He says, seeing as she's dead in 2 weeks, why don't you just be nice to her before she goes, you know? He goes, okay, I can do that. So he gets a bunch of flowers on his way home, gives her a bunch of flowers, and next day a box of chocolates, and every day he's being nice to her. Anyway, he comes back a week later and he says to the rabbi, he says, I don't want to, she's changed completely, she's turned into an angel. She's like, she's a different woman, I can't even believe it. He said, now I remember why I married her, and she's just, so the rabbi says, well, what are we going to do then? He goes, well, how can I stop her from dying? The rabbi says, well, just build the mikveh. So we have an idea that love is just, I feel like this today, and I don't feel like it the next day. But love is something which you can learn to do. You can listen to the person, you can respect the person, you can serve the person. And that's what love is actually. It's not just some whimsical pop song feeling. Feeling this loving feeling, You can feel a loving feeling for anything, and it can change very quickly as well. So Vedic culture is this ability to love is something which we cultivate in also our relationship with the spiritual master. They say that when the spiritual master leaves, then the disciple is like a queen crying for the king. So there's that love, that deep love and affection there, and that's something which has been cultivated. It wasn't just that. You saw your guru and you fell in love with him and everything was just hunky-dory after that. It was something you have to cultivate, you have to work at. Sometimes your guru chastises you and then you don't feel so, you maybe feel a little bit afraid to go before him. You think, I'm never going to get chastised again, But then you work on that and you follow the guidance that's there, and then you feel the benefit of doing it, and then you feel so much appreciation and gratitude. And so then the love is cultivated. So it's like that. I mean, also to assist, there's an astrological reading done, and the children are paired according to, at a very young age sometimes, according to the astrological chart. And they see, well, this nature will be compatible, or that nature. But if the person has a very strong adherence to following the Vedic culture and developing the qualities necessary in relationships, then that won't be such a deciding factor. It will be there to some degree, but if a person is very spiritually inclined, very Krishna conscious, then, and if the other person also is very inclined and very eager to practice spiritual life, then that is a much stronger foundation for a good relationship, if you're both committed to the same level. They have these sites you can go to when they say such and such, chanting 4 rounds, following 2 principles, 6 rounds, 3 people. Okay. Is there anyone for 4 principles, 16? Okay, yeah, I'm interested in it. She seems as committed as I am, so maybe this one will work, Any other questions or comments?
It's strongly recommended to have premarital training, so that they have an understanding before the marriage, so that they don't have disagreements.
Yeah, Mahatma was doing a whole series of talks and seminars as well on marriage and how each one should know their role and then act accordingly, and everything works nicely that way. Any question here? So it's not that it's just when I was a young teenager, we went through the punk age, and the punk was just rejecting everything, but there wasn't any real alternative. You just had to be obnoxious, basically. As long as you were obnoxious, you were a good punk, And so that was okay. Problem was, everybody that I was hanging out with, they were being obnoxious as well. They were being obnoxious to me, and I was being obnoxious back. So it wasn't really a sustainable environment to be in. I worked for maybe about 6 months, and then I got fed up with it. And one of the punk gangs said, "You can join us if you want, but you have to." The initiation ceremony is, we'll hit you on the head with a baseball bat, and if you don't say anything, then you're in. And I thought, I'm okay actually. I think we're going to move on from punkism at that point. But although I was disenchanted with complying with the system, which I considered was corrupt. I didn't have an alternative other than to just be obnoxious. And of course, although all my friends were against the system, they were all signing on and going down to the shops and buying things anyway. So when Krishna consciousness came along for me, because I rang my punk friend up, I said, "I've found it." He says, "What have you found?" I said, "I've found the solution. This is the real alternative. These guys are amazing. They're really up really early. They do all this meditation, and they're a society within a society. They have their own. It's their own world. They don't watch the TV. They don't listen to the radio, and they just do their chanting and their spiritual things. You should come along, you know." And he said, "What are the rules?" So no illicit sex, no intoxication, no weed eating, no gambling. And then I could see he wasn't so really that interested in finding an alternative. So Srimad Bhagavatam is saying that it's painting a dark picture of material, of family life in the material world, but it's also saying that there's an alternative, and that the wife and children are naturally dependent on the father, so then the father has to be strong. That's what the dynamic is, that if a person isn't very responsible and he's messing around all the time, and suddenly he's married and he's got 2 kids, he can't be like that anymore. He's forced to be less selfish and more dependent and more caring of other people, and considering all the time, putting other people's interests before his own. He's forced to have to do that. Maybe he wasn't going to do it on his own, so now he's put himself in a situation where he'll be forced to mature and develop a more responsible attitude in life. So it can be a positive thing. It can be taken. It's just, if people don't really understand what they're supposed to be doing and what it's for, then the whole thing breaks down, and then it becomes very messy and very confused as well. And Prabhupada's saying everyone's becoming self-centered, especially in the age of Kali. And then what aggravates it even more is that they have even if they do, Prabhupada's saying if they do have sufficient money, generally that's not the case, everyone's scratching around for money, but even if they do have sufficient, even then they're so self-centered. So it ruins everything. So it's this self-centered, selfish attitude which ruins everything, whether you're in family life or not in family life, or any relationship you have. If you're a taker more than a giver, then that will erode any relationship. So this ability to become compassionate and considerate and kind, then we can give shelter to so many actually. And that's the important thing. Become a compassionate wife, become a compassionate husband, bring up compassionate children, and then spread that consciousness.
Do you think that with this attitude of people in general, but men not taking their responsibility and being more of a taker, do you think that has caused the modern situation of women's uprising to be independent and to have your own job and sustain a family at the same time, do everything yourself because of the resentment of not being supported?
Yeah, that's so. If you have men not playing their roles, then why should women play their role? It's like playing a game, and I'm going to be the king of the castle, and I want you all to be my. So then everybody starts trying to play king of the castle, so the game doesn't work. So you play the part that you've been allotted, and you have certain qualities that you should be developing, and certain etiquette that you should be observing also. So if you're not doing that, if you're abusing that, trying to take advantage of it and exploit, and that's how the whole class system broke down, because the Vaishya is considered to be like a cloud, so he draws in all the moisture, and then he showers it down indiscriminately, and everybody gets the rain, and everyone benefits. But if the cloud just fills up with water and decides to sit on the top of the mountain and just enjoy being a big fat cloud, and everybody else is gasping for water, and it doesn't work. The whole system breaks down. And then there's a revolution. Well, you're not doing your part, so I'm not going to do my part. I'm not going to obey you. I'm going to overthrow you, and we'll kick you out or do something to you, and then we'll try and control ourselves, So to clarify that, and in Bhagavad Gita, and in fact throughout the Bhagavatam, there's many lists where there's qualities that we should have. And interestingly, in the Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 13, the first one is humility, and the second one is proudlessness. There's a Buddhist saying, do not think you are so great as to think that you are humble, because it's a very special quality to have, to be like that. And if more people were like that, then they say any fight that you've ever been in, you were always there. Any argument, you'll notice any argument you've ever been in, you were always there. So if there is an argument, then if a person is very humble, you see, he doesn't react in the same way, he doesn't get aggravated in the same way. But a person is very humble and very prideless and non-violent and well-intentioned, is a kind friend to all living entities. That's referred to quite a few times in Bhagavad Gita. If that's his attitude, then those qualities are very foundational in any relationship, actually. Whether it's teacher, disciple, or man and wife. So that's something which has to be trained and cultivated. Education now has become something different to what it used to be. Education used to be to develop character. That's when a person was considered educated, when he was well behaved and controlled and sober and thoughtful and considerate. That's real education. And that's all been thrown out the window now. Oh, well, maybe that won't be financially viable. So the financial viability outweighs the quality. We sacrifice the quality for the quantity. We can make a lot more stuff now, but it's all rubbish. So what you want, a lot of rubbish or just some good quality?
Is it important to have the understanding cultivated as well in that education? Because this could just be my experience, but growing up I was raised with quite strict religious principles, and then got to a point, and I was always asking why, but the answer was always because I met a movie, and my mum and dad. And then it got to a point where, the anarchy, the rebellion, was like, I want to experience whatever, and just went wild for like 3 months, a year. And then started to realise this is why, okay, and then went back. But it's kind of caused this contemplation of, well, if I had the other side of the education, maybe it's not important for everyone.
Well, nobody can be forced, but certainly they should be given the option to be able to choose. And it's interesting because generally people take up spiritual life because they're distressed. There's 4 types of people Krishna refers to in the 7th chapter of the Gita. Distressed, those in search of wealth, those who are inquisitive, and those who are searching after the absolute truth. Those are the 4 types of people that take up spiritual life. But then Krishna says, but those who are searching after the absolute truth are the most dear to me. So what he's indirectly saying is, even if you come to spiritual life out of distress, you must shift into the 4th category as quickly as possible and acquire the knowledge of why you need to do this. That's called sambandha jnana. You gain the knowledge first of all, and then abhideya, you start to implement, you start to put it into practice. So if you just grab somebody and say, I want you to do some abhideya, I want you to just put this into practice, I just want you to do this, and the person's not been given the knowledge in the first place, but he's been told to do something, it's not as effective. And then they may resist, they may feel they're forced, and then they'll have to still get that knowledge themselves by their own experience. So better just to give them knowledge in the first place, And if everyone's just doing it because, well, this is what you're supposed to do, isn't it? This is what my grandmother told me to do, and this is, you go 7 times round with the incense and you ring the bell. And so then it becomes ritualistic. everything becomes reduced to a ritual. Why are you doing this? I don't know, she's told to do it, it becomes a ritual. So the knowledge is there to protect us from doing things mindlessly and ritualistically. Because if it becomes a ritual, then you can change rituals. You could have a different ritual where you go into the television and you do 7 times with the remote control, and then you put the film on, and that's your new ritual you're doing instead, television puja. So you have to have the knowledge to understand why, so that it doesn't just become ritualistic. Okay, I'll finish there. This one Go Premanandi.
First Krishna.
Go Rebecca.